Growing up in the early to mid-2000s, the world of indie games seemed as if they were confined by the shackles of Adobe Flash Player and trapped on sites like addictinggames.com or Newgrounds. Every morning at school, my friends and I would make a mad dash to the computer lab just before first period and boot up these painfully simple applications like Etherina Beta, Ultimate Flash Sonic, Mega Man RPG, and all these low-quality time wasters that somehow commanded the attention of our ADHD-stricken minds. My 12-year-old brain was always fascinated by the notion that someone other than Nintendo or Sony was able to make these games, albeit mostly by ripping off sprite palettes from existing IPs, but whatever, it was still dope. As the years would go on, indie developers would graduate from being bound to web browsers, finding themselves on platforms like Steam as early as 2005. Instead of these simple point-and-click puzzle adventures, the single-button racers, indie games were becoming more complex, launching with better production, tighter gameplay, and actually feeling like the games that we would play on console. As we got older, our vision for indie games moved past the silly Super Mario clones, and instead evolved into these subtle narratives inspired by the games and films of our childhood. This is where we find today's protagonist, Justin Stander, an established programmer brought forth from the nexus of the freeware community. Like a few of the underground developers from our school years, he too got his start developing Flash-based games. However, with each title etched into time, Stander continued to set the bar higher, eventually finding a crescendo with his hack-and-slash magnum opus. Today we're taking a look into the mind of Stander, learning about his growth from a hobbyist game maker to being counted amongst Forbes 30 Under 30 for games development, and most importantly, diving into one of the most substantial pieces of games media within the last decade. This is the story of Katana Zero's development and the mind behind the mayhem. Katana Zero is a two-dimensional neo-noir action platformer with a focus on tight acrobatic combat that acts a bit more like a puzzle game rather than your typical hack and slash. Developed within Stander's own studio ASCIIsoft and published by Devolver Digital, Katana Zero's release can be attributed to a rotating cycle of artists, musicians, developers, but at the center of it all stood Justin. He began work on Katana Zero back in 2013 when he was just 19 years old. Stander built the game from the ground up on the Game Maker Studio 2 engine by Scottish software developer Yo-Yo Games. Game Maker Studio 2 utilizes the drag-and-drop visual scripting tool, which allows developers to perform common tasks like calling functions, instantiating objects, and manipulating files and data structures without having to write any code. While marketed towards novices, in the right hands, Game Maker Studio 2 has helped developers create amazing works of art, some of which you've probably played, like Hyper Light Drifter, Ministry of Broadcast, Minute, and Rivals of Aether. Gameplay revolves around a one-shot, one-kill mechanic. Both Zero and the vast majority of enemies go down after a single strike, as a means to make the enemies feel as if they're as powerful as you are. Zero typically squares off against an array of professional killers, from common thugs to riot police. Where Zero levels the playing field is with his quick and dexterous movement, rolling around enemies to get behind them or deflecting gunfire back at foes from long range. Additionally, in moments that require the player to think beyond the split second, Zero can slow down time by use of his Chronos ability, allowing the player to better react to incoming threats. Stages also feature environmental hazards that can be used to the player's advantage. Many of the hallways and corridors have items that can be thrown at enemy combatants, like small statues, knives, and explosives. Sometimes the projectile's attribute can interact with the environment, like this Molotov cocktail, which can be used to take out a string of oil drums and kill any targets adjacent to them. Katana Zero stands as a game with both simple and complex design. The straightforward controls make Zero incredibly approachable, while the application of these techniques in high-stress scenarios require a substantial level of competence of the mechanics. The world and setting is textbook cyberpunk with a little bit of Tarantino mixed in, crafting a narrative that is quirky, dangerous, and shrouded in mystery. However, the final product wasn't the result of some whimsical game jam amongst friends. It's the byproduct of years of trial and error, one person's endeavor to perfect the craft of both visual storytelling and engaging gameplay. Before Justin Stander focused on his efforts in game design, his true passions lied with the film industry and had an innate desire to tell stories. With that said, pressure from his parents redirected his career path towards getting a computer science degree at McGill University. However, that didn't stop Stander from carving his own path towards his calling as a storyteller, as he used these skills to create games, a hobby he fostered since he was a kid. Stander's first foray into the games industry was with 2009's Tower of Heaven, a freeware title in the same vein as other hardcore platformers, predating the likes of Super Meat Boy. While being fairly challenging from the beginning, Tower of Heaven demands even more from you as you progress through the stages by introducing rules known as laws that prevent the player from performing certain actions like stepping on highlighted blocks, touching otherwise harmless butterflies, or removing the ability to walk left. Design-wise, Tower of Heaven was modeled after the OG Game Boy aesthetic, as a means to disguise the difficulty and lull unsuspecting players into a familiar sense of complacency. Following Tower of Heaven's success, ASCII Soft teamed up with Adult Swim Games to develop 2013's Pause Ahead, another action platformer similar in nature to its predecessor. What sets Pause Ahead apart from Tower of Heaven is the time-manipulating ability of the pause button. Whenever you move in any direction, the player can pause the game to allow your avatar to float through the level. While paused, the character sprite becomes invulnerable to spikes and other hazards like these thwomp-like enemies. Once a stage is complete, a recording of your gameplay plays back with segments missing from when you stop time, as though you phased through the dangers. It's fairly interesting looking back at these works because you can clearly see some of the inspirations for Katana Zero in these games. While Zero isn't a Meat Boy clone like its predecessors, it's still a game that requires a great deal of execution. The time-manipulating effects of the Chronos meter and the aesthetic of the video playback feature are also great callbacks to Standard's previous titles. But starting from scratch, Stander needed to find a baseline, where he wanted the game's focal point to be grounded. He had plenty of system mechanics that could be used and reintroduced, but he needed to find exactly what Katana Zero was and how it would play. What were the game's themes, and how would he tell Zero's story? Many people look at Denton Games' Hotline Miami as Stander's muse, as both games share similar elements and overarching gameplay objectives. However, this is a common misattribution, as Stander didn't discover Hotline Miami until after Katana Zero's launch. The spark that jettisoned Katana Zero into existence was actually the result of Bo Blythe's influence with 2013's Samurai Gun.
It was more like an adaptation of Samurai Gun, which I felt was an extremely satisfying game. It really nailed making killing feel good, and a lot of that was about the one-hit kills. On top of that, it was trying to capture this feeling in Korean revenge thrillers where the main character is super fragile, but also goes out there and kills a lot of people. It's sort of like this John Wick or Korean revenge thriller feeling, where your main character is still just a person, but they're also this incredible badass. I really wanted the player to feel that way, so a lot of the design pillars were focused around making the player feel badass, mostly by making the challenge feel justified, so the success was earned.
This concept of making killing feel good was the cornerstone of Stander's design philosophy. Calling back to the John Wick effect, enemies needed to feel deadly, otherwise there was no satisfaction in killing them. He didn't want to deliver a game with a false sense of danger. It always needed to be real and present from the very beginning. While development for Katana Zero technically began in 2013, it wouldn't go into full swing until after he completed his undergrad at McGill University in 2016. He at one point was planning for a 2016 release as per a 2015 PAX Prime showcase with GameSpot's The Mix, but heavily overestimated the time and the cost in developing Katana Zero on his own. While still a laughably small budget by any studio's margin, Stander roughly spent about $60,000 of his own funds to develop the title. He didn't pay himself a salary, and he heavily limited his lifestyle for the sake of the game.
It was kind of hard to really wrap my head around. With a small game, you can really obsess over the little details. It would end up taking me like a year of work just to make a short game that can be completed in 20 to 30 minutes. So trying to scale that up to a full experience with branching paths and more depth and meat to it ended up being the massive undertaking. I didn't even begin to consider how big it was when I first set out on it. I think a lot of other indie developers have the same feeling, where they think that their first commercial game is going to take 2 years or something, and then it ends up taking 5 or 6 years.
Part of Stander's strategy in ensuring Katana Zero's success was to actually break away from the freeware scene. ASCII Soft had made a name for itself with Tower of Heaven and Pause Ahead, both games earning accolades from fans and critics alike, like Destructoid and IndieGames.com. He had also been involved with other projects like Dreamhopper and Overpowered, but he felt that the freeware games often come with a stigma that the value is found in how much you pay for it. Katana Zero wasn't going to be taken seriously without a price for admission, so he took a page out of Terry Kavanagh's book and slapped a premium on it.
I had seen Terry Kavanaugh's game, V, come out, and it made me realize that everyone really cares about a game when it's being sold. Kavanaugh had a very similar situation to me. Before that, he had made a bunch of freeware games, and they didn't get anywhere near the same attention as V. And after that, he continued to make a lot of freeware games, and they also didn't get much attention. It really drove the point to me that if I wanted to really have a career in video games, I would have to make something that was sold. So I guess Katana Zero came out of this desire to make a much bigger, justifiably sold commercial game.
One of the biggest challenges Justin faced was narrowing down the art direction. That's not to say that he didn't know how he wanted to present the game, as he openly admits that much of the game's aesthetic is lifted from Nicholas Winding Refn's 2011 film Drive, specifically the promotional posters. But there was a solid 2 years where Justin was flying solo with the art department, doing the best that he could on his own. Acknowledging his lack of artistic talent, Stander would go on to work with 14 different artists over the course of 3 years, mostly coming from the TIG Source development community ran by Splunky creator Derek Yu. It wasn't necessarily the inability to find a quality pixel artist that held Justin back, but rather finding one that was willing to stick around for the project. Many of the artists would only stay on staff for a week or two before dipping out. Sometimes they'd leave the same day. Because there were so many artists working on the game over time, a lot of the designs for the characters were mismatched, failing to give this ubiquitous art style across the board. This is where much of that 80s neon flair came in. Stander used a neon lighting effect and blurry overlays inspired by VHS video artifacts to cover up the blemishes and stylistic flaws of the assets, and by my judgment, you couldn't even tell the difference. While there was essentially a revolving door at the art department, composition-wise, the music stayed fairly consistent. Stander signed on Dutch producer Ludowick and American composer Bill Keeley to do much of the bulk work for the soundtrack. Keeley had actually worked with Stander on 2 previous projects before, Pause Ahead Side A and the aforementioned Dreamhopper. As for Ludowick, Katana Zero was actually their first foray into the video game scene, and has since supported projects like Avalanche's 2020 first-person shooter Second Extinction. Katana Zero's soundtrack is a sonic masterpiece. The title track is this eerily deep and pulsating synth beat, which marries up perfectly with the tutorial stage's stealthy theme. About halfway through, you're greeted by these menacing industrial melodies, leaving you with this disconcerting feeling as you make your way through waves and waves of armed guards and thugs. Each song sets you in this unnerving trance with thick melodic riffs and piercing harmonies over a droning bass line. Boss fights have these dirty, down-tempo phrases that are slow and methodical, almost as if Terminator was collaborating with Nine Inch Nails. It honestly should go without saying, but the OST could easily stand on its own merit as a solo project. It's just that good. With much of the development covered, let's get into the actual meat of the storyline. There will be minor spoilers, so if you want to experience the game on your own, please move on to this timestamp. Katana Zero opens in the city-state of New Mecca following the end of the Cro-Mag War, a Vietnam-inspired conflict between an industrialized metropolis and the denizens of an underdeveloped nation. During the tail end of the conflict, New Mecca heavily invests into a top-secret program called the Null Project, a series of trials to produce super soldiers that can give them an edge against the Cro-Mags. The cornerstone of the Null Project lies in a substance called Chronos, a psychoactive that provides limited precognition, slowing down the perception of time and allows the user to pre-plan the outcome of imminent combat scenarios. This combat drug was administered to a select group of trainees during childhood as a means to develop their ability to predict the future. Once these candidates were deemed ready, they were assigned to clandestine units and sent out on special missions. However, regardless of the group's secret nature, news of the program and its missions leaked out to the public. These Null agents were described as indiscriminate murderers, accused of killing innocents. This shifted public support for the war, persuading the New Meccan government to exit the conflict unceremoniously. These events lead us to Zero several years later. Our bathrobe-clad protagonist is a PTSD-stricken war veteran and an elite assassin. Throughout the game, Zero is given assignments from his superior officer/psychiatrist, who provides him with a series of hits between therapy sessions. Near the end of each of these appointments, the Shrink administers a healthy dose of the wartime drug, indicating that Zero is a byproduct of the Null program and is still heavily addicted. Providing Zero with Chronos is twofold. The first one is fairly obvious. Considering the nature of Zero's work, it is a necessity to have him pumped up with the psychoactive in order to stay at peak performance. However, long-term Chronos abuse has deadly side effects, to include vivid hallucinations that trigger during extended periods of withdrawal. Reality phases into obscurity, and the dangers of the mind override the user's cognition. This also makes Zero reliant on scheduled Chronos doses in order to stay alive, as total abstinence will result in a cruel and unusual death. Zero eventually crosses paths with V, a sadistic mobster working for the Mafia. Our Russian gangbanger takes a special interest in the swordsman after doing some wet work at a nearby club where Zero's target performed. V is a twisted bastard, taking his job very seriously to the point where he calls it art, which is the reason why he's so enamored with our mostly silent protagonist. He approaches Zero with an offer to join forces after seeing his handiwork in the first mission, where he is ultimately turned down and goes full-fledged psycho, doing everything in his power to subdue the super soldier. V and Zero wouldn't otherwise have crossed paths if it wasn't for the fact that the organization that V works for is trying to bring Chronos back, which could have massive implications on New Mecha if they prove successful. This opens the overarching narrative far wider than just Zero being a sword-wielding junkie with mental illness. And that's not even commenting on the complicated relationships with the Shrink, the little girl in the apartment building, the random NPCs of 3rd District, and all these little details that flesh out the underbelly of New Mecha and ultimately humanizes Zero. He's not a stone-faced protagonist. He's a deeply troubled young man put into a terrible situation, reaching out to anything that could possibly take the pain away. And that was something that Stander was trying to deliver to the player, to present this deeply flawed character and put his vices center stage. But he did it in a way that the game didn't flat out tell you, it showed you. Stander believed that the players weren't going to have the patience for a crazy lore dump, so he endeavored to deliver as much narrative and character through visual storytelling as possible. He didn't explain why certain characters were far more powerful than the cannon fodder you've been coming across. He executed it in boss fights that you were liable to lose. Major journalism publications who kept their finger on Katana Zero's pulse were quick to herald their praises. Nick Robinson of Polygon called it the most impressive game at PAX Prime, as it stood out for its gorgeous art style, super unique 2D lighting effects, and a strong sense of tuning and polish rare in most early demos. US Gamer's Mike Williams called it stylish as hell, and his favorite upcoming game at a PAX. ASCIIsoft was later subject to 6 nominations, including Best Independent Game from the Game Awards, Navigator's Best Original Adventure, and the British Academy Game Awards for Best Debut. Post-launch, it maintains an 83 Metacritic score with an 8.9 user score, and yielded over 100,000 copies sold on Nintendo Switch for its first day, coming second only to Cuphead, which also released on April 18, 2019.
It really exceeded my expectations. I mean, it's definitely done really well. It's actually the 26th highest rated game on Steam of all time right now. That really blows me away. It's just been overwhelmingly positive. Obviously, I kinda wish I could have finished the story in one go, because it ends on a to be continued. But even if I was to go back, I wouldn't have cut down the story at all because I feel like everything that was in there, I really trimmed down to its bare bones, just keeping the necessities. So if I had somehow cut it down into a much smaller project, just one small self-contained story, then I feel like it wouldn't have had the same weight and impact.
So what's next for Stander and ASCIIsoft? At the moment, Stander is currently developing a game called Pocket Squirrel, with Katana Zero audio engineer Erica Hampson and Shovel Knight Dig designer Phil Giarusso. It's described as a game where Pokemon meets Animal Crossing, incorporating roguelike RPG elements with traditional dungeon crawling. But more importantly, Justin is currently working on Katana Zero's DLC. Zero's story is not quite done, as the main campaign ends on a huge cliffhanger. Production has evolved from its original concept and is now expected to be over half the file size of the original game. In an update earlier this year, Stander has shown off new enemies, new weapon mechanics, and potentially new characters to further flesh out the world of New Mecha. And all of this is on the house. So if you've seen this video and you're intrigued by the story, its art design, its gameplay, I highly encourage you to give Katana Zero some of your time. While it's a bit on the brief side, it is truly a fulfilling experience that I cannot possibly give any more praise to. Hey everyone, just wanted to do a quick little wrap up here. Just wanted to say thank you for your continued support. I know that there's been a little bit of a delay since my last video. I just recently had a baby a few days ago, so a lot of my time and energy and resources has been taking care of my family. And in addition to that, I've been focusing a lot on the Megavisions magazine. We have issue 2 gearing up for launch in January. Right now we're in production for that. A lot of articles that are being written, a lot of reviews, a lot of previews, a lot of good stuff. So if you're interested in seeing some dope ass artwork, definitely check out the Megavisions magazine. If you want to see some extra stuff that I've been doing on the side, check out the Scrubverse Let's Play channel. Right now I'm playing Legend of Dragoon with my friend Corey. There's also the guys playing Shovel Knight and Mega Man Legends, and potentially might delve into Metroid Dread, who knows. As far as an update for the channel, I have to put the BlazBlue video on the back burner. Still a lot more research that needs to be done with that one. So in the meantime, I'm gearing up for another video to be launched in January. At the time of this recording, it is 2 o'clock in the morning and a Wednesday night, so I need to get to bed. So just wanted to say thank you for support, and I'll see you next time.